And we should fix our own cars. We should mend things, our washing machines ourselves. It's really important to understand how things work. I really don't think that politicians understand industry. I don't know whether I'm sure they understand schools, but they certainly don't understand industry. And they don't understand creativity. And it's not surprising because they followed the Oxford, the PPE, parliamentary assistant minister rule. They're not out in real life. And I think that's a big problem.
That's the inventor, Sir James Dyson. And we talk a lot about children's reading. Well, the children's author, Cressida Cowell, who wrote the book How to Train Your Dragon, she talked about her life-changing libraries campaign in schools and why it's so important.
Because I'm interested in magic, but I'm also interested in practical magic. I'm interested in the transformative magic of reading. But I'm also interested in practical magic. And so we've got 6 primary schools which have been chosen for 25% of their children are on preschool meals, and they all have different problems. We're trying to show with the kind of gold standard of books that look like sweets, not Brussels sprouts, that feel relevant to children's lives, that feel modern and that we know work.
That was the author Cressida Cowell speaking to the Times Education Commission. And if you pick up a copy of the paper, pick up a copy of the Times today, there's a full pullout, there's a 12-page pullout going right the way through the recommendations by the Commission. It's really interesting. And I'm sure we will turn to some of those themes here on the show. Right, up next, get on the YouTubes. Go on YouTube, search Times Radio. You can watch along live as Tim Shipman and I pause the action live from the House of Commons. It's PMQs Unpacked. It's coming up next here on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley and this is Times Radio. Coming up, we will bring you PMQs Unpacked live from the House of Commons. But first, a look at the headlines this lunchtime. The EU's announced it will launch fresh legal proceedings against the UK after the British government said it was scrapping parts of the post-Brexit trade deal. The European Commission said the UK was breaking international law and there was no political justification for making unilateral changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. Network Rail is warning half of Britain's rail lines will be shut during next week's strikes. Members of the RMT union at Network Rail and 13 train operators are walking out on Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday in disputes over pay and jobs. It's thought the government will appeal the ruling by the European Court of Human Rights, which forced a deportation flight to Rwanda to be cancelled at the last minute last night. The Home Secretary says work's begun on the next flight to carry asylum seekers to Africa. Priti Patel due to make a statement in the House of Commons later. And 4 men are continuing to be questioned after a policeman was seriously assaulted during last night's Nations League match between England and Hungary. The officer was knocked unconscious after being hit in the head, sustaining significant cuts and bruising. We'll bring you a full news roundup at 12:30, but now it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Very good afternoon to you. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio and on the Times Radio YouTube channel, joined in the studio by Tim Shipman. How are you?
I'm very well.
You missed a belter last week.
It sounds like, yes, I would have had to get my claws out, I think.
Do join us on the YouTube channel today. Good morning from upstate New York, says someone. Good afternoon from anyone from sunny Yorkshire, says Roy. From Lima, says John. Hello from Brum, says Mark. We've got people in Guildford and Barcelona. It's hot
Guildford and Barcelona.
Guildford and Barcelona. Well, they do say that Guildford is the Barcelona of Surrey. Yeah. It's also very hot. Let us know where you're watching along. John says, I am in Sherwood. No murders this morning. I think that's a reference to there's a new TV show.
By the excellent James Graham.
By the excellent James Graham, of course. Hello from Lithuania. So you're all on.
That's probably my sister.
No, it's Martin. Somebody called Martin. So anyway, let us know where you are. Go onto the YouTube, search Times Radio. What do you think Keir Starmer will choose today, Tim?
Well, that's very interesting. because there's a lot he could go at. He could have a go at the sort of Rwanda immigration stuff, but we know Labour doesn't much like touching immigration, and there's a debate straight afterwards, a statement from the Home Secretary. He might want to get a clip in on that, but I suspect he'll look elsewhere. I mean, Northern Ireland, again, is an obvious kind of mess, but again, Brexit's dangerous terrain for the Labour Party. The other dangerous terrain, as you commented at the top, was that he didn't do terribly well last week, and there's been a lot of excellent journalism since about people on the front bench of the Labour Party saying Keir Starmer's a bit boring. So really, if he wants to sort of disprove some of that, he needs to nail an issue quite well, and cost of living's still a sort of propitious area for the Labour Party, but he hasn't shown yet that he can do that pithily and succinctly enough to satisfy all those people who talk to you and Patrick Maguire about how badly he's doing. But you're right, this is a biggie.
I did get a bit of a ticking off last night from what I think we'll describe as senior Labour sources who insist that he's not boring and there is a plan.
Excellent. Did they tell you what it is?
No. But let's find out. Maybe Keir Starmer is going to reveal all now. He's not going to bore us to death. It's going to be lively. Let us know what you think of it as you're watching along on YouTube. Let's go live now to the House of Commons. It's PMQs Unpacked, and Keir Starmer's question number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay tribute to all those who served in the Falklands? My uncle was among them, serving on the HMS Antelope when it went down. Thankfully, he made it back, but too many serving in that war didn't. And we remember them all. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, Britain is set for lower growth than every major economy except Russia. Why?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, I'll tell him. Mr. Speaker, actually, we are going to have, according to the IMF and the OECD, we are, in addition to the fastest growth in the G7 last year, we're going to have the second fastest this year, and we will return to the top of the table, Mr. Speaker. But the reason, Mr. Speaker, other countries are temporarily moving ahead is, of course, because we came out of the pandemic faster than they did, because we took the right decisions to come out of lockdown, which he opposed, Mr. Speaker. And that's why, right now, Mr. Speaker, we have the highest number of people on payroll employment on record, Mr. Speaker.
Well, there we are.
That's a classic, isn't it?
Yes. So, in fact, I didn't realise we'd started a poll on the YouTube channel saying what should Keir Starmer go for. 61% saying cost of living, 27% said Rwanda, only 12% said Northern Ireland. So that's clearly where we're going. In our many conversations with shadow cabinet ministers this week, when asking them what is the plan and how do you sum it, the word that everyone kept using was growth.
Yes.
I think the risk with that is that nobody really knows what. Normally, we don't really know what that means.
No, I think that's a problem with it. And, it's all about the size of the economy getting bigger. But yes, I think he's on his home turf. I think the good thing about that first question was that it was short and it was pithy and it was impossible to answer. Boris Johnson then answered it with, a range of facts and, I've got some different statistics. That's always a good plan when you're having statistics thrown at you. We will go back to the top. It's a bit like sort of Everton management saying,
next
we're not going to say
it's
when.
all going to be different.
Yeah. But, we'll do our best. And then actually a reasonably plausible point that, our growth zoomed while theirs wasn't because we came out quicker and we've slowed down a bit and they're overtaking us. I think critics of the government would say the medium and long-term forecasts are not exactly overwhelming. The other interesting thing, of course, Starmer did, and we've talked about this before, he went out of his way to talk about the Falklands War, personal family connection to it, which is, again, Starmer trying to sort of connect with the public.
And there've been various events this week, the memorial service and things marking 40 years since the Falklands. So that's
exactly,
why
that's part. Labour's 3-point plan when they took over was I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. Well, that's what that is. Part 2 was introduce Keir Starmer to the public. My uncle was on HMS Antelope. Tick. Part 3 is have a plan for government and look like a government in waiting. That's what we may or may not see in the subsequent 5 questions. But he's ticked a couple of his boxes straight off the bat there.
Well, let's see where he goes next. Let's go back to the House of Commons. It's Keir Starmer. Question number 2.
Mr. Speaker, he always likes to blame global forces, but global forces are just that, global. Everybody faces them. Britain isn't under crippling economic sanctions like Russia. No wonder he doesn't want to answer the question, why is the UK set for lower growth than every other major economy?
Prime Minister! Mr. Speaker, I think everybody can see that I've just answered the question. Once again, he's guilty of what my legal friends call ignoratio elenchi. He's failed to listen to what I've actually said, Mr. Speaker. What would be useful in supporting the UK economy right now would be if the leader of the Labour Party ended his sphinx-like silence about the RMT strikes coming up in the course of the next couple of weeks. Will he now break with his shadow Transport Secretary and denounce Labour's rail strikes?
You've got to admire it, haven't you?
I mean, the skill of performing that. I mean, even on question 2, sometimes you might leave it a bit longer before doing. Never mind that. Let's talk about this.
If you ever want to hear the sort of perfect Boris Johnson answer to a PMQ, that was it, wasn't it? It began with Ignatio Elenchi, some reference to some historical classic kind of thing. It then. To be fair to Boris Johnson, he did sort of answer the question, and his point is right that Starmer just read out his next question and didn't really think about it. I mean, bad luck for Starmer that was the first time that Boris Johnson has attempted to answer the first question in about 6 months, but he sort of did. So, and you could hear even as Starmer was asking his second question, Tory MPs shouting out he did answer.
Is his answer?
So, but yeah, and then a seamless pivot into the Sphinx, and maybe Boris Johnson's going to start arguing that we're doomed economically because of the unions, but to then term them Labour's rail strikes.
Labour's rail strikes.
We're into the realms of full-blown chutzpah now. But so far, Johnson's having the better of this, I would say.
I would say so. Someone on the YouTube channel said, I find myself a lot less excited about the fact the PM took Latin than he may assume.
Well, that's certainly the case. And there are people who are very good at Latin who say that Johnson's Latin and knowledge of the classics is sort of locked in a kind of O-level kind of... but for those of us that didn't study it, it's always sort of mildly notable that it happens quite so frequently.
We should point out, I mean, the reason the government, or Boris Johnson, is trying to nail the Labour Party as Labour's rail strikes is because they're going to be really bad, and they are Network Rail said half of lines are going to be closed next week,
which will have an economic impact.
Which will have an economic impact and a political impact. And if there's a risk that people get cross with the government for it, if your train isn't going to take you to work. So
and those of us that have that wonderful memory of the Miliband leadership, where Ed Miliband was put on the spot and famously did that interview where he said these strikes are wrong about 19 times.
These strikes are wrong. Everyone should put their differences aside and get back around the table. Exactly. Yeah. Well, let's find out. I might be wrong. I suspect Keir Starmer's not going to answer the question. Or maybe he will. Maybe we'll use this opportunity to respond on the question of rail strikes. Let's go back to the House of Commons. Question number 3.
He's in government.
Just to remind the Prime Minister, he seems to have gone. His Prime Minister's question is not opposition question. Keir Starmer.
He's in government. He could do something to stop the strikes, but he hasn't lifted a finger. I don't want the strikes to go ahead, but he does. He wants, Mr. Speaker, he wants the country to grind to a halt so he can feed off the division. And as for Mr. Speaker, as for his boasting about the economy, he thinks he can perform Jedi mind tricks on the country. These aren't the droids you're looking for. No rules were broken. The economy is booming. The problem is the Force just isn't with him anymore. He thinks he's Obi-Wan Kenobi. The truth is he's Jabba the Hutt. Last week he stood there and boasted that we would continue to grow the economy. This week, it turns out, the economy shrank for the second month in a row. How does it help Britain to have an ostrich Prime Minister with his head in the sand?
Let's just jump in there. I'm very confused. So he's both an ostrich and Jabba the... I'm not completely au fait with the Star Wars because it's children's films and I don't really like things that involve aliens and whatnots.
I think Jabba the Hutt will be seen as fattest as well. He was quite the blob.
Oh yes, I'm aware of. Yeah, but I don't really understand how we got from. I mean, that's quite a good line on the rail strikes. I don't want them to happen. You want them to go ahead.
And actually, that
feed off the division.
It almost felt. I don't know whether that was pre-planned or not, but that felt quite good, passionate, and actually is a subtle political point. You know, Boris Johnson is provoking. You know, splits on Brexit, splits on strikes. You know, splits on the Rwanda stuff. This is all part of their election campaign, which is to have divisive issues where people have to take a view one way or the other and to get Labour on what they would perceive to be the opposite side from the bulk of the general public. So that's actually a good point from Starmer. But then to drift into a series of what can only be described as low to mediocre jokes.
I don't understand how we got on then.
Jedi mind tricks.
These are not the drones that you're looking for.
Well, that must be some quote from Star Wars.
Yeah, I think it is.
Ignorantly.
But
it's a bit niche.
What's it got to do with... I mean, we're talking about
and
trade
the
strikes
Jabba the Hutt
and the
reference, I don't understand at all. I mean, he was a sort of, you know...
He's a baddie, isn't he, Jabba
he's a baddie, and he's a great big fat baddie.
If somebody wants to get in touch with some more detailed Star Wars analysis...
But when even the village geeks like us don't have a clue what he's blathering on about...
do you think this is him not being boring?
This is him not being boring
and
doing some jokes. But the jokes, yeah...
Well, anyway, let's go back and see what Boris Johnson's got to say responsible for that.
There he goes again, Mr. Speaker, running this country down when everybody we've got the highest employment, payroll employment.
Look, I want to hear the questions and the answers, and whether you like it, but I genuinely believe it. The public who watch it also want to hear both. Prime Minister.
I mean, Mr. Speaker, we've got lower unemployment than France, Germany, Italy, Canada. We've got the highest number of people in payroll jobs, as I've just said, 620,000 more since records began. And he might like to know this, that just in the first 5 months of this year, this country has attracted, I think, £16 billion of investment in its tech sector. He doesn't like these European comparisons. Let's make it for him. 3 times as much as Germany, twice as much as France, Mr. Speaker. He should be talking this country up, not running it down.
Yeah, well, there we are. Yeah, running the country down. I mean, I think they're mainly talking him
running
down.
The country down, running the country down, running the country down. Yeah, was there anything else?
I don't think there was. I'm still confused. Jabba the Hutt's a fat criminal slob, says Nick in Wokingham.
Well, that's
make it that way. Apparently it's droids, not drones. Did I say drones? Maybe it's just the idea of Keir Starmer talking made me think about drones. All made total sense to this Star Wars geek, says someone. And Pete says, stop pretending that you've never watched Star Wars. I've never seen a whole Star Wars. I did try to watch one.
I've watched the first 3. I didn't bother with the rest of them.
Oh, no, I tell you that. I saw the one with the annoying chap with the big ears when that came out. What's his name?
Jar Jar Binks.
Jar Jar Binks, exactly.
Yeah.
Who I'm sure will be making an appearance at PMQs at any moment.
I'm getting messages, though, from senior Tories as we speak saying he's seriously overcorrecting for boringness and I don't understand who's telling him to attempt these gags. So they're quite amused for different reasons.
I have a horrible feeling that Patrick Maguire and I might be responsible for this, but we'll see how we go. This is PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Listen along on Times Radio. You can watch along on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Let's go back to the House of Commons now. It's what? Question number 4. 4. Keir Starmer.
That's the ostrich. He's not just denying how bad things are, he's actively making things worse. His 15 tax rises are throttling growth, and the director of the CBI is so fed up, he's reduced to saying, can we stop Operation Say Big Dog and move to action stations on the economy? Now, Mr. Speaker, we know what the Prime Minister says about British business in private. I think that's pretty unparliamentary. But when did screwing business turn from a flippant comment into economic policy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, look, I just reminded the House of what's happening in Tech Week in this country, the massive investment that's coming in, helped, by the way, by this 130% super deduction for business investment that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has put in. Never forget, Mr. Speaker, that Labour, under Labour, taxes go up on businesses and on people. We're not only already putting £1,200 more into people's pockets. We're having a tax cut worth £330. He talks about taxes, £330 on average for everybody who pays national insurance. Labour have already made spending commitments in this Parliament alone worth £94 billion more than the government is spending. That's £2,100 for every household in the country, Mr. Speaker. No wonder no Labour government has ever left office with unemployment lower than when they came in.
My wife's been in touch. All PMQs should have Star Wars references, in my opinion, she says.
Oh, that's fair enough.
She's a big fan. Other people are saying they liked the Star Wars jokes. I'm not sure we're getting hugely. I mean, there is at the heart of the Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson keeps repeating this line. Under Labour, taxes always go up. But as Keir Starmer pointed out, is it 15 tax rises he talked about?
That's
they have
right.
put up national insurance despite a manifesto promise not to.
That's true, but what Johnson says is also going to be part of the election dynamic, which is that Labour's policy seems a lot of the time to be, well, we sort of agree with what you're doing, but we'll do a bit more of it. And he claims there's £94 billion of spending. These back of an envelope calculations that political parties too tend to be double, triple counted. But you can easily see, Labour's tax bombshell posters. It won't be posters now, of course. It'll be memes
and
GIFs
tweets and
tweets
done in
and
bad fonts and all of that.
£2,100 per household. I mean, I think the interesting thing about this week is that Boris Johnson is there at least for a bit and probably for quite a bit. And Labour now know they're up against him, and this is the battle we're probably going to have for the next 2 years. This is sort of the first week of the rest of their lives, and here we are. And it's a bit of a mess, and it's not an easy win for Labour in the way that a lot of them would think it ought to be.
But I suppose going back to the conversation we were having right at the beginning, it feels a bit odd that we're, the two big political stories dominating this week are Rwanda and Northern Ireland. And Keir Starmer, as the leader of it, can't go near them. No. Can't mount an argument around them. Right, let's go back, then we'll continue PMQs Unpacked. Question number 5 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, 15 tax rises, and we're sacked for the highest tax burden since rationing. He says the economy is booming when it's shrinking. He's game playing so much. He thinks he's on Love Island. Trouble is,
there was another joke.
Prime Minister, I'm reliably informed that contestants that give the public the ick get booted out. And it's not just low growth. He's also lost control of inflation. He was warned about this last September. And what did he do? He dismissed it. He didn't act. He sat on his hands. Now prices are through the roof, and we're set to have the highest inflation in the G7. When will he accept he got it badly wrong when he claimed that worries about inflation were unfounded?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we're helping people with the cost of living with £1,200 on the 14th of July. The money will be going into people's bank accounts. Why can we do that, Mr. Speaker? Because we have the fiscal firepower to do it, because the economy is in robust shape, with record numbers of people in payroll employment, Mr. Speaker. And that is thanks to the steps that we took that he continuously opposed. And if he wants to, and I just remind Mr. Speaker, he has a chance. I won't say this interrogatively, Mr. Speaker. He has the chance now to clear it up. He can oppose the Labour's rail strikes right now. Say he can disagree. He can disagree and give him that opportunity. Let him disagree with the union barons who would add to people's costs in the coming weeks.
I mean, again, I suspect we won't do that. I mean, a slither of news there. It was announced by the Department for Work and Pensions this morning. If you weren't across that, July the 14th is the date that everyone will start getting their sum of the money, £326, as part of the £1,200 support package this year. The rest are following a second instalment in the autumn. For normal people, that might be the single most interesting fact to emerge thus far.
Absolutely, definitely. Bastille Day.
Bastille Day, there we are. And a mere, fortnight after potentially 2 by-election results, which might cause the Prime Minister some trouble.
I'm sure they're doing it as quickly as they can.
I'm sure the two things are completely unconnected. I don't really know what to say about Love Island. Do you? I mean, if you ever, I've definitely never seen a whole episode of Love Island.
I wish I could say the same.
The Shipman house. So you're across what the ick is, are you?
Well, I haven't watched this current series, but I have been known to. It's a guilty pleasure sometimes. I mean, you could argue that Love Island references with Boris Johnson is a clever way of talking about his slightly exotic private life, and this is a very subtle and amusing way of attacking the Prime Minister. Contemporary with the times, the sort of thing that the punters out there will understand.
What the young people want.
What the young people want, until you look at the faces on the Labour benches behind him and hear the slightly awkward, shuffled laughter of those that are trying to be supportive and the gaping silence of those that wonder what on earth he is doing.
Well, particularly because we've just had quite a lot of... so we've had, Star Wars, ostriches... He's so far.
And ostriches, by the way, don't bury their heads in the sand. It's a little-known fact that ostriches are much maligned.
So
by
far,
these references.
Keir Starmer in this PMQs is described Boris Johnson as being like Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jabba the Hutt, an ostrich, and a contestant on Love Island.
Well, I think the thing with these sort of references, if they capture something that is the sort of essence of the Prime Minister, in a way that the public can comprehend, that can be really, really valuable, and it can become something that he jabs at him time and time again, and that, you know, rattles Boris Johnson, upsets him, and labels him in a way that, you know, the average punter that doesn't pay that much attention to politics understands, then that can be a hugely beneficial thing. The trouble is, he does 5 or 6 of these when he gets on a roll. None of them really sticks, and a lot of them don't seem to make any sense to start with.
And it's the constant search for the Vince Cable's Gordon Brown's transformation from Stalin to Mr. Bean.
Yeah, perfect,
because it was a cultural reference which fitted with. You'd expect Vince Cable to know who Mr. Bean was. It felt authentic, but it also spoke to, but Gordon Brown has gone from being the clunking fist to a bit of a joke figure. And I'm just not sure any of that is necessarily cutting it. Tony in London says, the more I hear Boris speak, the more I detest him. What is the answer to any of the questions? I think he has a bit. I mean, he might not like the answers, but he's slightly more engaging with them. Someone else says, can we please put Starmer out of his misery? He's woeful. Always good to hear from somebody in the shadow cabinet.
It's a serious point, though. I've had at least 3 conversations in the last fortnight with people saying, well, the perfect outcome of this period is for Boris Johnson to be wounded by everything that's happened in his party, and for Durham police to intervene and remove Keir Starmer as leader of the Labour Party.
Someone says, Anthony says, expecting a reference to Bart Simpson at some point. So, well, let's find out. Who knows where Keir Starmer's going to go? This is his final question number 6 on PMQs Unpacked.
Mr. Speaker, I don't want the strikes to go ahead. He does so he can feed on the division. Mr. Speaker, they're making a lot of noise now, but I've got a long list here of what his MPs really think of him. Dragging everyone down. Who said that?
This is a brave
Come on.
way of kicking off.
Who was it said that? Authority is destroyed. Come on, hands up. Which of you was it? Which of you? Come on. Can't win back trust. Anybody owning up? You're very quiet now. Hands. Mr. Speaker.
This is basically what Patrick and I suggested you should have done last week.
My personal favourite is this. This is a document circulated by his backbench, in which they call him the Conservative Corbyn. Prime Minister, I don't think that was intended as a compliment. Week after week, he stands there and spouts the same nonsense. The economy's booming. Everything's going swimmingly. The people should be grateful. But whilst he's telling Britain that we never had it so good, millions of working people and businesses know the reality. Britain's growth is going to be slower than our competitors and our inflation higher. A Prime Minister who sounds totally deluded, totally failing on the economy, failing to tackle...
I think we need to get to the end of the question, but in the...
Keir Starmer's just getting to his stride there, and Lindsay Hoyle's cut him off.
I will hear the end of the question in silence. Any more noise in this corner, there'll be another cup of tea early if we're not careful. Keir Starmer.
A Prime Minister who sounds totally deluded, totally failing the economy, failing to tackle inflation, failing to back business, failing to help working people through the crisis. And, Mr. Speaker, His big idea, go back to imperial measurements. He's got 80s inflation, 70s stagnation, now he wants 60s weights to complete the set. When is he going to ditch the gimmicks and face up to reality that under him Britain's economy is going backwards?
Let's see the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, a couple of quick points about Mr. Corbyn, the Right Honourable for Islington North. First of all, he tried repeatedly to get him elected as Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker. Secondly, speaking from experience, he's relatively dynamic by comparison with the Right Honourable Gentleman, Mr. Speaker. Dynamic and coherent.
Might be helpful if you speak to me. I'm struggling to hear because of the noise on both sides. So please, if you look to the chair, it'll be easier for both of us.
But what we're going to get on and do, Mr. Speaker, is continue to take the tough decisions to take this country forward, and decisions that are on the side of the British people, Mr. Speaker. They're blatantly on the side of the RMT union barons. When there are some ticket offices that barely sell one ticket per hour, Mr. Speaker, we are on the side of the travelling public. By the way, he hasn't mentioned this, but they're on the side of the people traffickers who would risk people's lives at sea, Mr. Speaker. And we are on the side of people who come here safely and legally. Safely and legally, Mr. Speaker. They carp and snipe from the sidelines. That's what they've always done. We take the big decisions to take this country forward. And no matter how much welly his Right Honourable friend, the Deputy Leader, may ask him to apply, it doesn't matter how much welly he pretends to apply, when that welly, Mr. Speaker, is always on the left foot.
That's a reference to Angela Rayner, who last week gave an interview to the BBC where she said she wished that Keir Starmer would put a bit more welly into it. I mean, he certainly had more welly this week, Tim.
He did. One feels a little bit like the man who waves his legs around and his wellies fly off in slightly different directions. But, it had some energy, it had some life. He's trying to use humour, which I always, we complain when he doesn't use it and he becomes the sort of earnest lawyer. But I think he needs to find something that's going to stick. If he can find a good line that he can use against Boris Johnson time and again, something like Captain Hindsight that gets used against him, which Johnson, I've heard it in focus groups, it does stick a bit. And Johnson's last reply there was, on the ticket offices that sell one ticket an hour, Boris Johnson had all that in London when the ticket offices were being closed. He tended to just bow down to the RMT himself when he was mayor because it was a lot simpler, which is an interesting point that someone might make. But, when you then start saying Labour on the side of the people traffickers, we're into the realms of exotic rhetoric.
But also, there's also Boris Johnson always slightly annoyed that Keir Starmer hasn't asked him about the things he'd like, so he really wanted Keir Starmer to ask him about railways and Rwanda.
Yes.
And having not done that, he just threw it back at him. Anyway, you are all bitterly divided, it seems, over how Keir Starmer's done today. Some of you liked the hands up bit. That was quite good. We talked about that last week. There's so much material. Keir Starmer did it a tiny bit last week.
I'm curious that Boris Johnson didn't hit him back with, well, who said that you were,
boring everyone to death.
Yeah, that would have been the obvious response. I thought that was what Boris Johnson would have done at that point.
Yeah, Rob says hands up bit is good, so is Conservative Corbyn. And then the next person says this is desperate. Tom says this is desperate stuff from Starmer. We should ask pointed, short, specific questions and not offer speeches. I suppose it's all slightly in the eye of the beholder.
That's true, but I think the way to judge the outcome today was to look at people in the chamber. And if you look at the Tory front bench, they were cock-a-hoop today. Priti Patel sitting there grinning. Even Rishi Sunak, who often sits there with his arms folded, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world than supporting Boris Johnson. He was heckling across the aisle, and
I will
there
say
was cheering behind. When
in Keir Starmer's defence, which is my default position, I thought his line on the strikes was pretty good.
Yes, no, that was very good.
I thought it was a shame he ended up then repeating it word for word, suggesting it was a pre-planned, pre-scripted thing. But his line that you're the one who wants the strikes to go ahead, I don't want them to go ahead, you're trying to sow division.
And that's an important thing to get out there into the sort of, if all the big ideas about this government, those of us that write about politics write about that, their strategy of finding wedge issues, and people don't know what a wedge issue is unless they're busy paying attention. But, if you can get it so that, that gets out into the sort of public domain, that's a very worthwhile thing to have done, because that's precisely what this government...
And actually, that would have been a route into things like Rwanda and Northern Ireland.
Yes.
Boris Johnson's not interested in solving problems, he's interested in sowing division. That might have been a way of tackling those issues.
Could have sewn it all together with that. There we go. We've solved it again. We've solved it again.
Well, given that last week we suggested he read out some of the off-the-record quotes from Conservative MPs.
Well, maybe next week. Go at it next week.
Maybe go at it next week. Well, there we are. I thought Keir Starmer hit the back of the net today after putting 6 over the bar last week, says Kevin. And someone on Twitter says, it never ceases to amaze me, the ignorance of these presenters who have no idea of the real people in the street and Star Wars and Love Island. I don't mean to upset you, but the people in Star Wars are not real. Then again, they are from the Johnson class, apparently. Although not you, Tim, because you do watch Love Island. Anyway, thank you for that, with your 21 followers on Twitter. Thank you. We will do the best of the rest of PMQs, the backbench contributions. We'll do that next, after we get a news update from Rachel Jewell.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. The Labour leader has used Prime Minister's questions to criticise the PM over the economy, adding Boris Johnson says the country is booming when it's shrinking. Sir Keir Starmer told the Commons Britain's growth is going to be slower than our competitors and our inflation higher.
Week after week, he stands there and spouts the same nonsense. The economy's booming. Everything's going swimmingly. The people should be grateful. But whilst he's telling Britain that we never had it so good, millions of working people and businesses know the reality.
The Prime Minister told MPs we've got the highest employment, we've got lower unemployment than France, Germany, Italy and Canada, and we've got the highest number of people in payroll jobs. The EU has given Britain a 2-month deadline to respond to legal action following Boris Johnson's plan to tear up the Northern Ireland Protocol. It says the UK government's new legislation to override parts of the deal, which governs Northern Ireland's post-Brexit trading arrangements, is illegal. There's a warning next week's 3-day rail strike will cause disruption for 6 days. More than 40,000 workers are walking out because of a row over pay and redundancies. At least 444 people crossed the Channel yesterday. That's the highest daily figure since governments announced plans to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda. A plane bound for the East African country was grounded last night, but the government's vowed to press on with its controversial policy. Another fine afternoon for most areas. Sunnier skies in the south. It'll be a fine evening too and a dry night. Cloudier with rain at times for parts of northern and western Scotland. Feeling warmer than yesterday. Nick Ellaby has the sports.
England's cricketers have been fined for a slow over rate in the second test against New Zealand and will lose 40% of their match fee. They've also been docked 2 Test Championship points. They currently sit 8th in the table after a dismal 2021. But new captain Ben Stokes and coach Brendan McCullum have got England playing positively again. Johnny Bairstow hit the country's second quickest Test century of all time to secure an early series win against New Zealand yesterday. Double Ashes winner Steve Harmison told us a full house at Trent Bridge made all the difference on the final day.
Huge amount of credit to Nottinghamshire County Cricket Club for letting people in for free. It just shows you that Test cricket's still alive, even if you try and charge £160 for a ticket at Lord's. You let people in for free, and the atmosphere yesterday, 17,500 people there yesterday, and quite a few of them would probably have been to a game of cricket for the first time, which was brilliant.
Meanwhile, Joe Root has returned to the top of the World Test batting rankings. He made 176 in the first innings. Rory McIlroy has accused golfers of going back on their word to join the controversial Saudi-backed LIV series. He's been a strong critic of the breakaway tournament, which has seen participants blocked from competing in American Tour events. The Northern Irishman, who's preparing for the US Open this week, insists he had no reason to doubt what certain players were saying.
I guess I took a lot of players' statements at face value. I guess that's what I got wrong. You had people committed to the PGA Tour, and that's what the statements were put out, and people went back on that. So I guess I took them for face value. took them at their word, and I was wrong.
And WBC heavyweight champion boxer Tyson Fury says he'll do a U-turn on retirement and fight to unify the belts. The Ukrainian Alexander Usyk currently holds the IBF, WBO and IBO heavyweight titles after defeating Britain's Anthony Joshua. Tyson Fury told promoter Frank Warren to dig deep into his pockets and make the Usyk fight happen.
I am a prize fighter and I do fight for prizes. But it's going to cost, if you want me to do a mission on this guy, this middleweight, and show you what a real heavyweight does to him, then that's going to be expensive.
This is Times Radio.
Meet the upgrade your business deserves. A Square point of sale that works as hard as you do. Easy to set up and easy to use means no training required and zero hidden fees or surprises. So you have all the tools you need in one reliable solution. From the fully integrated Square Register to the powerful iPad POS Square Stand and the portable card machine Square Terminal, find the upgrade that has everything your business needs. Square Up Europe Limited is authorised by the Financial Conduct Authority.
Times Radio with Matt Chorley.
Very good afternoon to you, Matt Chorley on Times Radio. We've been doing PMQs Unpacked. Keir Starmer comparing Boris Johnson to an ostrich, Jabba the Hutt and a contestant on Love Island. Make of that what you will. Tim Shipman, the Sunday Times chief political commentator, is still here. Let's do the best of the rest now. We can go to the House of Commons. This is the SNP leader in Westminster, Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday our First Minister started a national conversation on Scotland's right to choose an independent future. When we look at nations like Iceland, Ireland, Norway and Denmark, it is clear that our neighbours are outperforming the United Kingdom. They deliver greater income equality, lower poverty rates, higher productivity, social mobility and business investment. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on and on. The evidence is overwhelming. Scotland is being held back by Westminster. Prime Minister, all those countries can use the powers of independence to create wealthier, fairer and greener societies. Why not Scotland?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't doubt my right honourable friend's talents as a conversationalist, but I think there are other subjects in the national conversation right now, and they include, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing to come through the aftershocks of COVID with the strongest jobs-led recovery of any European economy. As I said, 620,000 more people across the whole of the UK, Mr. Speaker, in payroll employment than there were before the pandemic began. And I think another subject of national conversation is investment into our whole country, investment in Scotland, investment across the whole of the UK, as I mentioned already, in the tech centre. And the whole of the UK standing strong together on the international stage and sticking up for the Ukrainians. I think that's some of the things that the country is also talking about, Mr. Speaker.
I mean, actually, it's one of the big political events of this week, Tim, and it's not really, it's not on the front pages particularly today, but, in the next 12 months, the battle for Scottish independence, the Boris Johnson's attempts to keep the UK together is going to be one of the dominating themes.
Yeah, that's right. The SNP has to keep pushing this, and I think a cynic might suggest that if they really felt they had the votes and the support to actually have a referendum, they might not be having a conversation. They might be calling a wildcat referendum. Tories insist Boris Johnson is never going to allow a legal referendum while he's Prime Minister. And the problem for the SNP is that while, polls ebb back and forward a little bit on whether independence would win, they're pretty solidly against actually having the referendum in the first place at the moment, which is why they're starting this conversation. But again, Boris Johnson sort of engaged with the question and answered it on its own terms. And
he doesn't seem to engage more with Ian Blackford than.
I think they're rather fun. In fact, I was in the corridor when the Tory leadership vote was being announced last week, and Blackford strolled by and had a very friendly conversation with some of Boris Johnson's closest aides who, ostensibly regard him as slightly ridiculous, but they were all sort of enjoying the parlour game. And that's the thing in Westminster. Quite often, relations behind the scenes are much friendlier than they appear to be on the floor of the House of Commons.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a lot of love lost between Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer. Let's go now. Boris Johnson's very keen to talk about the rail strikes. Well, Liz Twist, the Labour MP for Blaydon, has raised just that.
In just 5 days, rail passengers across the UK and in the North East will be facing huge disruption. Do you want to listen? No, we don't. But on the eve of the biggest rail dispute in a generation, it's emerged that ministers have not held any talks whatsoever since March. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Prime Minister.
You've done out.
I ask the Prime Minister, has he met with trade unions and employers in the rail industry to attempt to bring this dispute to an end? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, I noticed that what the one union baron was asked about this. He said, "I don't negotiate with the Tory government," is what he said. That's what they said, Mr. Speaker. We all know how much money the Labour front bench take from the RMT, Mr. Speaker. We know why they're sitting on their hands during Labour's rail strikes. They should come out and condemn it, Mr. Speaker.
What an interesting question.
Yeah.
And what an interesting non-answer.
And that actually, it goes to, you sort of wonder whether maybe Keir Starmer should have bitten the bullet and gone harder on the rail stuff and said that it's, trying to pin it on, boy, maybe he didn't want all the stuff about, how much money people take and so on. But it's an interesting point. These stories about how ministers haven't engaged, they haven't arguably done enough to try and avert these strikes.
No, I mean, there's legitimate points on both sides. Boris Johnson, when he was London mayor, did not like engaging with aggressive union barons. In fact, I think he didn't see Bob Crow, who used to run the RMT, for about 6 years. Generally, they would buy off the union and hope that it all went away, and then make a bunch of political points about it. And that's what the Tories have decided to do on this occasion. You can perfectly well argue politically that the demands that some of these rail unions are making in the current climate are ridiculous. When you've got policemen and nurses getting sort of pay rises of a quarter of the size of what is being demanded by some of the rail unions. But instead they there's something to be said for Starmer's argument that the Tories would just like this to happen and have a political split over it. Quite what would be achieved by getting in the room with them, who knows? But it's generally regarded as sensible for governments to try, at least.
And I suppose that's going to rumble on all into next week, when suddenly it'll become a reality for people who actually want to get onto the trains. Just finally, then, Theresa May, remember her? She's popped up joining PMQs as well. We could take a listen to what she had to say in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Dominique Davis, is the niece of Dom Phillips, the British journalist missing in Brazil, alongside the Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira. Will my right honourable friend ensure that the government makes this case a diplomatic priority and that it works to do everything it can to ensure that the Brazilian authorities put the resources necessary to uncover the truth and find out what has happened to Dom and Bruno?
I thank my right honourable friend very much, and I can tell her that for representing the niece of Dom Phillips. And of course, like everybody in this House, we're deeply concerned about what may have happened to him. FCDO officials are working closely now with the Brazilian authorities following his disappearance on the 5th of June. The minister responsible has raised the issue repeatedly, the search and rescue effort with Brazil's Justice and Public Security Minister. And what we've told the Brazilians, Mr. Speaker, is we stand ready to provide, Madam Deputy Speaker, I should say, we stand ready to provide all the support that they may need.
I mean, interesting there, Theresa May doing the job of a local MP, raising this case of Dom Phillips, a freelance journalist who's gone missing, and actually Boris Johnson offering quite a detailed response.
Yeah, he was obviously aware that this might be something she would raise. Classic Theresa May. It would have been very interesting to hear what her thoughts were on Northern Ireland. But the reason she stayed in the House of Commons was because she actually loves being the MP for Maidenhead. And always did, even when she was Prime Minister. This is a classic case of just raise the case. I mean, she would know as Prime Minister what is involved in doing all you can to help. And it may be more than sending the junior minister to berate someone on the telephone. He at least engaged with it and gave her a proper answer, and I'm sure she'll be doing some more lobbying behind the scenes. But his answer didn't sound to me like doing absolutely everything you can.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the tragedy is, given the case, the bodies of both Dom Phillips and Bruno Pereira have been found. So there's a limit to,
It's not a search and rescue.
It's not a search and rescue anymore. But it's a very sad story. Theresa May raising it there in the House of Commons. Tim Shipman, nice to see you. Sunday Times chief political commentator. Off to find some news for the weekend. We've got a few days. Yeah,
we've got a few days. But yes, the intrigue in the Labour Party is more interesting than it was a week ago.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that all pans out. Lovely stuff. Right, it's Matt Chorley on Times Radio. Up next, we will hopefully bring you some details. Priti Patel just making a statement in the House of Commons on her official reaction to the news that plane did not take off to Rwanda last night. We'll bring you details of that next here on Times Radio.
Early breakfast on Times Radio with MHR. It's time to experience smarter HR, payroll and finance. Join Anna Cunningham every weekday morning from 5 for a fresh take on all the stories making the morning headlines.
I'll be reviewing the front pages you're waking up to and making sure you start the day well informed.
Plus, keep ahead of all the markets with Times Radio's daily dedicated business bulletin. Early breakfast on Times Radio with MHR. Unlock the potential.